Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to today's webinar, Attacks on the Supply Chain and Critical Infrastructure, What You Need to Know and Steps You Need to Take. My name is Kim Peretti and I'm a partner and co-leader of the Privacy, Cyber, and Data Strategy team at Alston. Our panel today is in partnership with Dragos. Dragos provides expertise that helps companies understand operational technology, which we're going to be talking about in detail today, and impact to business, as well as effectively understanding and responding to cybersecurity matters. Their products and services protect organizations across a range of industry, as well as mission critical networks, including ICS and OT. And thus the reason why we wanted to partner with them today in this webinar. Recently, we've had both unprecedented supply chain attacks on various third-party providers of widely used software and products, as well as criminal attacks on companies and critical infrastructure, causing significant operational impacts with far-reaching effects. In the shadow of these attacks, the Biden administration released 2 executive orders, the second of which we're going to discuss in detail today, as it directs Nist to develop guidelines for secure software development, which is likely to have an impact beyond just government contractors. Today, our discussion will cover an overview of critical infrastructure and OT and ICS. We're much more familiar with information technology and less familiar with operational technology and industrial control systems. We'll discuss that overview with the overlap of supply chain security, as well as the recent executive orders. We're also then going to pivot over and talk about the current threat environment for ICS and OT. And then we're going to end discussing preventative and proactive steps you can take for your companies in this area. As a teaser for upcoming events, we're very excited to announce that just 2 days ago, Alston & Bird has a new partner who has joined our cybersecurity practice, Kellen Dwyer. He's a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the National Security Division of DOJ. So stay tuned for our next webinar, which will feature Kellen and focus on cybercrime, the new national security threat. Before I introduce today's panelists, let me go over a few housekeeping notes. This program is being recorded. We will send you the slides and a link to the recording after the program. If you are reviewing the materials after the fact, please note that the date reported in this webinar was accurate as of the morning of June 16th, 2021. And some of the content when you review the webinar later may have changed over time. CLE credit is available for this program for New York, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Virginia CLE credit. Please download the affirmation form located in your webinar confirmation email and enter the codes that will appear during the presentation. After completion of the webinar, please either email or fax the form back to the contact information found on the form. If you're requesting CLE for any other states, you're not required to fill out the form though. A certificate of attendance will be sent to all attendees following the webinar. And please note, we're unable to offer credit for audio-only participation. If you would like credit, please be sure you're logged into the webinar platform. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation today, so please feel free to submit through the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And with that, let me introduce our panel today. We are thrilled to welcome Ben Miller to our panel. Ben is a Vice President of Professional Services and R&D at Dragos, where he leads a team of analysts in performing active defense inside of ICS and SCADA networks. In this capacity, he's responsible for a range of services, including threat hunting, incident response, pen testing, and assessments for the industrial community, as well as advanced research and innovation within the ICS security community. I'd also like to introduce my fellow colleague, Amy Mushar. She's a partner as well in Alston's Privacy, Cyber, and Data Strategy team. She has over 20 years experience in the technology space, is a former technology consultant and former Chief Information Security Officer. She advises clients on proactive data security practices, data breach incident response, regulatory compliance. She's handled security incidents and has interacted with federal and state agencies and forensic service providers, and design post-incident response notification and remediation plans. She's very active in the ICS and OT area as well, and provides compliance support on just a range of security laws, security audit standards such as Nist and more. Now, with that introduction, I will hand things over to Amy to provide an overview of critical infrastructure, OT, and ICS. Amy.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Ben. We're thrilled to be here and talking about this topic today. I can tell you 20 years ago, I was talking to fellow technologists about how much we need the merger of operational technology and, at that point, IT that had an information security component. 20 years ago, we're back in the same question. How are we merging operational technology with our critical information security systems and corporate infrastructure? Within that, we've had a number of events over the past few months that have made us examine critical infrastructure within that lens. And under US law, we have 16 critical infrastructure sectors. These are sector groups that were created by the Obama administration and administrations previously, and even with Donald Trump under the order creating CISA, that linked these 16 sectors as the members of the sector-specific Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council. That advisory council and these sector coordinating councils have helped promulgate rules for the critical infrastructure industry or begin those discussions to help with the linkage of operational technology systems with data security. We still have a long way to go as an industry, but given recent events, we think that will definitely be accelerated. So, we keep talking about OT and ICS and DCS, but what is it? ICS are industrial control systems and DCS are distributed control systems. These are information systems that control industrial processes, manufacturing, production, and distribution. They're what you typically see as your SCADA-based systems. When these systems were being brought online, sometimes in the 1970s and 1980s, yes, I have been involved with pipeline projects where we are looking at network nodes that go back to almost the infancy of the internet. But the focus of putting these systems online wasn't data security. The focus really had operations at its heart and improving the reliability of these systems and reducing manpower. We don't want to have to send someone out to read a meter. We want to be able to do it automatically. In addition to these SCADA-based systems, the ICS and DCS, we also have the linkage to corporate functions, and that's operational technology. These are the programmable systems or devices that act with the physical environment or manage devices that interact with the physical environment. This is our bridge between our physical systems and our corporate systems. And what we have found in this catchphrase of digital transformation that has hit various different utility sectors as well is we are beginning to take these SCADA systems and bring them in and incorporate them with our billing systems, with our HR systems sometimes, and timing and time clocks, and a wide variety of technologies that we're using within our corporate network, where some of our corporate networks might not always be a zero trust network where we have an understanding that the network can already be compromised. So as we're thinking about ICS, DCS, and critical infrastructure, our various different legal frameworks are not synonymous for how information security works within those sectors. We have a difference in operational technology, but more important, these DHS facilitated working groups councils, these SCCs, really have siloed a number of the utilities by sector. So the standards may be very different depending upon what sector you are in. For For example, the chemical sector has its risk-based performance standards, its RBPS. The dam sector has yet another one. And I would like to point out that the DIB, the defense industrial base sector that we work a lot with, primarily is not working through its SCC to promulgate cyber standards. The DIBs, most of the DIB are government contractors, not private industry, that are traditionally subject to Nist standards like 800-171 and 853A. So, and also we have healthcare and public health that are traditionally subject to HIPAA. So we're dealing with not a synonymous cybersecurity standard, lots of different environments with different operational technology and legal standards. And we're trying to figure out, how do we operationalize information security among them all? Several years ago, the federal government helped promulgate through Nist its cybersecurity framework. And this framework was supposed to be flexible and adaptable to encompass all industries, really to organize their information security controls within the traditional functions of data security, which is identification of threats, protecting the network, detecting threats on the network, response and recover, which is our traditional incident response and after action. That flexible framework has made for just a wide variety of implementations where, some clients that are heavily regulated under FedRAMP or a NIST 53A standard, they also organize themselves under the NIST cybersecurity framework. But we have some clients that just take these general security controls and aren't diving into the details of their data security. So we still have within critical infrastructure a wide variety of legal standards and a wide variety in how they choose to implement cybersecurity. Now, the convergence of critical infrastructure and the supply chain that is supporting the critical infrastructure, there's quite a lot of linkage, before the incidents of the past few months. But we thought it was very important to indicate, the March 2020 Solarium Commission report that had some language in it really foreseeing the difficulty that we've seen with pipelines, with a water treatment facility, and even municipalities, if they've all been dealing with ransomware as well. Just for a moment, I wanted to read a passage from the executive summary of that report. The reality is that we are dangerously insecure in cyber. Your entire life, your paycheck, your healthcare, your electricity increasingly relies on networks of digital devices that store, process, and analyze data. These networks are vulnerable, if not already compromised. Our country has lost hundreds of billions of dollars in nation-state sponsored intellectual property theft under cyber espionage. A major attack on the nation's critical infrastructure and economic systems would create chaos and lasting damage far exceeding that were wreaked by fires in California, floods in the Midwest, and hurricanes in the Southeast. It's pretty telling that that statement was issued, months before we've seen the events of the past few months. And that Solarium Commission report was really trying to organize the federal, public, private, and government contractors, semi-quasi, in the middle of all of this, organize that whole team of actors into 6 pillars that were, looking for basic US government reform in cyberspace, federal agency CISOs doing a better job of implementing their own programs, strengthening norms in cyber and those cybersecurity tools, promoting national resilience, and most importantly, operationalizing cybersecurity collaboration with the private sector. I want to underline that last point because up until now, the information sharing apparatus, like the taxi system and other systems where we've tried to encourage private industry to share vulnerabilities, often that information sharing is not as robust as we would like it, given the fact that there's still liability and private companies are protecting their networks, but we're all starting to realize that we're all battling a shared group of criminals. Until that Solarium Commission report, we had a lot of activity in this area, but it was siloed and not getting at the critical vendor management problem, which is the supply chain. We had CBO or Congressional Budget Office reports that would largely tell us that both industry and agencies are not dedicating enough budget to cyber. We had Nist that was largely looking at information security, of course, standardization, and we approve of that. And largely when it was thinking of the supply chain, they're thinking of hardened frameworks for each type of major software provider, not how the patches and the configuration recommendations occur within a patch cycle process. And CISA, which it was concerned with public-private information sharing. We're starting to see the merger of all of these contexts in the past few months, and really the past 20 years of work coalesced. And that was the hope of two executive orders that were somewhat in succession of the very new Biden administration. The first executive order of improving America's supply chains really was directed at COVID-based infrastructure and the fact that we had semiconductor difficulties, PPE difficulties as a result of COVID. And it really is an attempt to assess vulnerabilities within the supply chain and strengthen the resilience of and critical supply chains. Important for us and all of the information technology companies on the line, or those who, even though you don't feel like you're an information technology system, but you may supply some technology, that ICTS, that information communications telecom sector, is in the process of being reviewed by the Department of Commerce and is included as one of the subsectors in the critical supply chain. And it is being reviewed in response to pandemic concerns. We expect continued reports from the Department of Commerce this year, updating us on what they believe to be the status of supply chain security within that sector. That executive order occurred in February, and then in May, largely in response to the SolarWinds crisis in December and January and into February, the executive order 14028 of improving the nation's cybersecurity is directed at the software supply chain. That interesting linkage that you can be doing all the right things, patching and configuration management and monitoring the infrastructure of your networks. But if the vendor supply chain is compromised and patches are faulty or patches introduce malicious software, then we still are introducing a meaningful opportunity for compromise, given that very important vector into someone's network. This executive order wanted, of course, it dealt with both the public and the private sector, but important for those government contractors on the line. We'll talk about key dates in just a moment, but it also will be promulgating new cyber proactive and breach reporting standards under the FAR. So for those government contractors on the line, we want you to listen in intently, given that this executive order, in addition to examining the supply chain, is also directly connected to those of you in the government contracting industry and your roles under the FAR and DFARS. What are some important dates from this executive order? And important for all of us to remember as well is for each of these dates, there is likely to be public comment period. Nist, under the Improving the Nation's Cybersecurity Order, is to publish preliminary guidelines by November 8th of 2021 on the software development lifecycle and the software security and supply chain. And the guidance will identify practices that enhance that software supply chain security, being attuned to standards, procedures, and criteria. Additional guidelines, including procedures for periodically reviewing and updating those guidelines, are expected to occur on May 8th of 2020. Each of these opportunities and dates is an opportunity for public commentary.
Amy, can I jump in? I do think this is one of the most important parts of the executive order. It's focused, of course, on supply chain security, likely through the contracting process with government contractors. But just as the Nist cybersecurity framework was developed for critical infrastructure, we certainly saw once that framework was developed, it being used and referenced as a standard framework and best practice for many industries outside of critical infrastructure. So I think all eyes are going to be on this guidance and how it might have direct applicability or indirect applicability outside of government, the government contracting industry.
Absolutely, that's very right, Kim. And in addition, many of those on the line might think government contracting, I don't need to worry. I'm a COTS-based software. I'm a commercial off-the-shelf software that is not subject to the FAR and DFARS in many of the cybersecurity respects. If we're looking into the software supply chain security and making recommendations, there is the potential for this to not just hit government contractors and be an industry standard, but also to be laser-like focused on COTS-based software in addition to the regular government contracting technologies. What we're also seeing is Nist is to publish guidance for critical software that will be at that very heart of COTS versus true government contractor. And that's to be published very soon by June 26, 2021, within about a year, which is very soon if you're looking in most government contracting rule promulgations. And there will be guidance outlining security measures for critical software to be released on July 11th of 2021. Many companies are already gearing up their lobbying and other public policy efforts to be prepared for Nist's release and also to socialize their experience prior to Nist's release. The minimum standards for vendor testing of their software code will be released by July 11th after consultation with the NSA. Important for us is, as we are looking out and keeping an eye on each of these dates, comment periods, and promulgations, we also will be assisting clients with making sure that Nist is aware of all of the different flavors of software supply chain, all of the different types of actors, and then that this cannot be a one-size-fits-all model for software development security. Now, with that, what we'd like to talk about is, what's been happening lately in the current threat environment. And Ben Miller from Dragos is going to take over for this portion of the presentation. And thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate it. And thank you, Kim, for opening up too. We can go ahead to the next slide. Mm-hmm. Great. So I want to focus in on industrial control systems and talk about a little bit about OT. And I think as we get started, I have three broad themes that hopefully will resonate with the audience. The first one being increase in the connectivity of these industrial control systems. So this is a trend that isn't slowing down. It's only increasing. So when we're looking at the risk profile of how we got to where we are today, it's not that these sometimes there's a myth that these OT is very simple, it's very straightforward, it's static in these environments. Historically, that was true, but over time, the complexity has increased and the interconnectedness has increased, and that's really what's exposing the digital attack surface that we will be talking through today. Another broad theme is the threat actors behind attacks against OT and ICS. They are only increasing. They are not going away either, unfortunately. So they're increasing in volume, but they're also increasing in capabilities. And we'll talk through a little bit of that later on. And the third challenge that we have just as a community of industries around operational technology is lack of visibility into what's going on in these environments. So I'll speak to at the very end a real focus from the early days on preventing attacks That's actually put us in a tougher position where some of those controls may have eroded over time, and we still don't have detection and response capabilities around them because we were relying on the prevention piece, which largely in today's world doesn't necessarily hold up anymore, and we need to be a little bit more proactive.
And then,
Yeah.
do you think that the problem of the lack of detection is a tools problem, or is it a human integration problem? Because I've heard a clients express both.
Yeah, I would certainly, if it were one problem, I think we would have solved it a while ago. It tends to be a little bit more complex than that, and absolutely there is a tools component to that, and gaining visibility and gaining access to the data that you need. But there's also a challenge at an organizational level as far as like who owns this problem. Is it the local facilities? Is it the corporate security teams? And are they actually communicating? So corporate security team may have a view on how to respond to a facility that they do not understand how the facility works, how it operates, the safety components of that facility. When we start getting into operational technology, there is discussion on human safety, environmental safety. That's much different than in the IT space, where you're worried about a database server going down and the impact to an operation, not to the community at large. So the mission's quite a bit different when we start interacting with these facilities, whether they are a refinery or electric generation plant or a manufacturing floor. They have unique risks that are engineered inside those environments. And so it becomes a much larger discussion of not just tools, but also process and workforce and having the right people engage at the right time in these environments.
Or even be aware of the problems. We've seen that operational technology staff might even think it's not security's province to be able to have monitoring over their infrastructure. So it's the tribalism versus technology is so important and interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the local facilities, they have a long memory. The local facility team will remember 20 years ago how IT caused a switch to go down and impacted operations for several days. And so they remember those conversations, and it is a discussion on partnership and gaining trust when you're in that realm. It is a deeper hole to dig out of, for sure.
Absolutely.
Ics attacks. Let's talk about that. So on the aspect of ransomware, malware, denial of service, and just what the threat landscape looks like in general, I will start with about 5 years ago when Dragos started focusing on understanding the threats that are out there that's focused on ICS. We had a couple of anecdotes of prior attacks. The easy one being attack in Ukraine distribution utilities in 2015. We had anecdotes, but we didn't have hard evidence of who are the threat actors out there, what are they focused on, and how many are there. We've made some inroads in that regards. So the very, very first activity group we tracked was Electrum, which was responsible for the Ukraine attacks, as I mentioned. Those activity groups have increased over time. We're currently tracking 15 activity groups that have had demonstrated an interest or a capability to attack industrial control systems. These are wide-ranging attack groups that are persistent over time. That they often line up with nation-state interests. And some of them have demonstrated really strong capabilities, capabilities such as generating outages in Ukraine's electric grid, capabilities of affecting safety systems within refineries in Saudi Arabia. multiple plant trips within that environment that could have potentially put that refinery in an unsafe position and threatened legitimate human lives and safety in that regard. That was both of those cases were pieces of malware that were highly tuned to their industrial environment, so that high sophistication in what that looks like. And again, that's only increased over time. So what we are tracking on average is for every one of those activity groups that may go dormant for a period of time, 3 more take its place.
Absolutely. And just to give a little bit of commentary on the legal end, about 5 or 10 years ago, when we saw retail breach after retail breach after retail breach, the attackers just kept getting smarter, and they weren't just targeting mere vulnerabilities in the network. They were directly targeting themselves to specific cashier software as an entree into a nationwide cafeteria network. They were, upping their game once they realized the specialty software within an industry. It was quite fascinating.
Yeah, I believe we're starting to see that on the criminal side with ransomware as well. So certainly ransomware from many of our engagements that we've responded to, especially over the last several months, have been opportunistic and maybe even accidental at times on impacting OT environments, where the ransomware moved from the IT environment into the OT environment. That certainly has occurred. However, there's been a heightened focus, I believe, on the ransomware groups on business disruption. And they're seeing opportunities of, if I'm looking for a business disruption event, operational technology is a key differentiator in that regard. So we have seen ransomware that's even tailored to looking for if they're in an OT environment. And so those aren't widely deployed, widely used. But if we're looking at from a capabilities, a growth perspective, certainly nation-state aligned actors have been moving in that direction for a number of years. And we're starting to see that in the criminal space as well, with ransomware starting to maybe not have specific capabilities in these environments, but at least knowing if they are in the environment. And that's a building block that they need in order to actually generate these capabilities.
Absolutely. Great.
Excellent. So to my point earlier of these are really simple environments, in the myth behind that, I wanted to give an example of what some of these environments look like. Oftentimes the IT versus OT discussion, you get a mental image of a network diagram with a big box that says OT, and then there's a firewall, and then another big box that says IT, and you can say, okay, we're heavily segmented, and we're good. The reality is that it's a bit more complex than that, and so this is actually a visualization of a port in a terminal that would be receiving and moving liquid natural gas. And you start seeing the layers of complexity. And not only do you, in the very top, see the VLAN in the middle there, that's a business network. But you also start seeing a lot more interconnections. You're seeing connections to the substation. You see network connections to the ship-to-shore links. You see connections to radio links, and you start seeing a much more complicated view on, well, if it's not just securing these environments from your business network, it's also your third-party suppliers, vendors, contractors, and partners that you have linkages to in your most critical assets that are truly operating the foundations of businesses in many ways. And so as we look at this, there's really just 2 firewalls. We have multiple levels. Those levels aren't really security levels so much as the engineering view of real-time operations versus not quite real-time operations, and where the humans gain visibility into the industrial process, whether that is electric grid or purification of water. Same sort of concepts exist across that. And so this is how a typical environment would look like. And you can see the complexities of a simple password share between these levels would allow ransomware, for instance, to enter in the environment if you don't have strong security controls and continue to maintain them over time.
Absolutely. And likewise, some of these levels of the network might share the same management network, might have a jump or patch server network. There's a wide varieties on how you can erode network segmentation where you believe it's strong within your corporate environment. And we've even walked into client environments where they have mere routing rules separating the various different levels of their network with no true inspection. So you've got that firewall level of inspection for malicious traffic in between network segments. So there's often shared infrastructure, shared management, and potentially fuzzy inspection or no inspection that erodes the levels of the network.
Yeah, oftentimes the visibility that the security teams have quickly evaporates as we move from level 4 down. They just lose that access, and that's where Dragos focuses a lot of our technology on. But it is a challenge on them not only having visibility, but also understanding what that visibility is telling them from an operational perspective. And that's where they need strong partnerships with the local facilities to truly understand that.
Yeah, and for the lawyers on the line, just ask, what's separating X network level 1 versus level 2? And if you hear routing rules, dive a bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. The first response that you'll often hear is we're air gapped or we're segmented. And then the follow-up question that you can ask is, well, okay, if I need data that's in this environment and nobody's on site, how do I get that data? Oftentimes they will piece through exactly how you can get that data remotely, which kind of diffuses that discussion of, well, is it air gapped or not? Certainly, if they can remotely get the data, depending on how you define air gap, you have an opportunity there of gaining access into that environment remotely.
Yep.
And Ben, can I ask a follow-up on the visibility? I mean, what do you recommend and how you get visibility as you work from level 4 on down? Is it just access, or what do you need to do? What would they need to do to get that visibility?
Yeah, it's important to understand as you get lower into that stack, it looks a lot less like IT than you would expect. It doesn't look like servers. It doesn't look like something that would be in a data center. These are like very rugged, specialized computers, often called controllers or remote terminal units that are having some sort of play with the real world, whether they are monitoring through sensors or actuating the environment in some way. As you move further up the stack, it becomes a little bit more traditional, where level 3 is often, and in this case, level 2, system operators have a computer, a workstation where they're monitoring those environments. Gaining access and identifying choke points that you can monitor, and the internal network traffic at level 2, level 3, and if you have a 3.5, through network sensors and strong network logging, as well as host logging. Those are key maturation steps that a lot of these environments haven't gotten to, which is really important from a response perspective. I'm sure I'll touch on it in another slide. You got the best incident response plan, but oftentimes when you're looking at responding into an OT environment, and when we're walking in to an OT environment for our customers, they can have a great incident response plan, but they have no data to back it up. So you're immediately re-instrumenting their environment to capture data of what happened today, and the data that happened 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago, it's simply gone and it doesn't exist. And that's a challenge when we're looking at doing root cause analysis or understanding the vectors that came in through this attack and piecing that together.
Very interesting. Should we move on to the direct connections to the OEMs?
Yes, absolutely. So this is actually a really interesting discussion that started with SolarWinds. So SolarWinds, certainly, I think we're all familiar with the breaches around that and the activity. What does that mean from an ICS standpoint? Like, how is this uniquely different in the OT environment versus the IT environment? Well, you have the photo there is actually a turbine unit. So this is something that would generate power. It could also be a form of this would be on a train as well for locomotion. But this is a GE gas powered turbine unit. You do not buy one of these and then install your software alongside of it. Like, it becomes a embedded system. I like to think of it as when you buy a car, you don't replace the computer in the car. It's with the car. It's going to last the duration of the car's life. In the case of a turbine unit, you're talking about a lifespan that's measured in decades, not in years. And that comes along with software challenges, supply chain challenges, but also third-party connections. So in this case, this diagram to the left of that photo is really showing the turbine control units, the perimeter between the turbine control unit and GE. So GE, in this case, using them as an example, they're certainly not the only OEM that has these environments, but there are remote third-party maintenance networks, diagnostic networks that have telemetry that's coming directly off that turbine and centralized into GE. And many of these environments also have other software stacks that they're using to monitor the health and status of these units. Some of that software that was monitoring the health and status was SolarWinds. So you can go through the checklist from an OT perspective. You can check your inventory of everything that you have in your facility that you own. You may not find SolarWinds in the environment. That doesn't mean SolarWinds doesn't have access into your environment through third-party connections that are not even remarked as SolarWinds. It's part of the service delivery. So this is the challenge in supply chain discussions, is that it's not even hardware, whether it's counterfeit hardware or mystery chips that may be on hardware. That's a really hard challenge. It's also software, but it's not software that's just on a CD that you receive and then you load it in. It's also these shared services and models that are consistent across all the industries from a support and maintenance perspective, and also from a supplier perspective. When we start talking about electric grid and generation and transmission, it becomes really complicated pretty quickly with all the number of players involved.
Absolutely. And I know we'll move on to the ICS OT architecture.
Yeah, so a quick point here, because I also recognize the time. I'm keeping track of time, and I know I have about 20 minutes, and that's almost expired. When we start looking at how do we architect these environments, it's helpful to think in terms of fallback. If your options during a breach are, do we separate the OT from the rest of the enterprise, and that's your only fallback, then it's a really challenging discussion of how can you safely respond and recover in that sort of circumstance. The reality is our environments have become much more interconnected, and the business systems are relying on OT, even though maybe the OT environment isn't relying on the business systems. There's these codependencies that we have, and being able to identify those trust levels and start staging fallback solutions of degraded service versus complete impairment of services those can be achieved from an architecture standpoint. And I think from discussions on resilience and other areas that we need to go, that's the discussion that we can be having within these OT environments, so that it's not a kill switch sort of question, but something that's a little bit more nuanced and different options to the business on how they can recover from ransomware events or other large scale business disruption events.
Yeah, it's a different type of disaster recovery and business continuity question.
Yeah,
but it's similar to what we've been, planning through for years, but just within a very different technical context.
Yeah, a lot of what my team focuses in on is what does a really bad day for your particular facility look like, and what are the individual systems, individual components that control that and influence that. That's where we focus on our attacks, our simulated attacks. When we do penetration testing, is how can we have the biggest impact? And we draw a circle in their environment of, if we gain access to this particular device, we can take that device offline that's going to cause a cascade effect. That's that systems of systems sort of analysis that we will need to do to really get in front of large scale business disruption events.
Mm-hmm. And for the lawyers on the line, just ask for those plans, or ask for the roadmap for those plans. Ask someone to take you through the disaster recovery and business continuity. It might be a topic where folks think their eyes might glaze over when discussing operational technology, cyber, and resilience. But it's an area that you can quickly identify if you don't have a business impact analysis, if you don't have a hierarchy of resumption online, if you don't see that there are systems with fallback periods or systems with different mirrors within different environments so they can come online easily and quickly. Those are the things that we should be looking for as lawyers to try to issue spot. Do we have resilience at enough granularity to help facilitate our operations? And it might only be something that you can sample on the tiniest of percentage basis, but we need to at least be asking those questions as lawyers to our technology partners.
And I would say a lot of these environments as well, to add on to that, they're designed by engineers, whether they, depending on the environment, whether they're chemical engineers, electrical engineers, etc. They follow the laws of physics in how they instrument these facilities, but they do not necessarily account for what if somebody tries to abuse my environment, and what would that look like? That is an entirely different discussion that often the security team is bringing in. That is a fresh perspective from an engineering aspect. But when you get the engineers engaged in that conversation, there are absolutely other mitigations that they could take at an engineering level to remove that risk from the table. You mentioned the water treatment challenges from several months ago. There are certainly ways you can mitigate that from an engineering perspective. You could just not put all of a certain chemical into a basin all at once, so that nobody can release all that chemical into the environment, for instance. So there are engineering steps that can be done as well, that is moving us beyond just a cybersecurity aspect, and really just honing in on risk and how you can just take risk off the table through instrumenting your engineering processes as well.
Yeah. I worked with an FBI agent once who I think said it best: you merge great minds with your operational engineers and your devious minds with those in cybersecurity, and you come up with very interesting solutions. Well, we'll have to segue off of this architecture point, because I know that there are people on the line who would like CLE credit. And if you're going to be requesting CLE credit for the jurisdictions named, here's the first code that you need. It's A as in Apple, B as in Barry, 78921. Again, that's A as in Apple, B as in Barry, 78921. And now we've gotten into the prevention and proactive side of this presentation. And Ben will start by taking us through, why are we here to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of this discussion is pretty dreary. It's not optimistic. There are a lot of things that we can do from a proactive aspect, but how we got into kind of the mindset that we're in is to also understand the facilities. They deploy standards, and they generally don't deviate from those. Unlike cybersecurity in the traditional enterprise space, it's very fast paced. It's constantly moving and changing, and the programs are adapting. The facilities are looking for one standard, and I'm going to follow the standard, and that's going to satisfy the security program. The challenge, we did this analysis recently where we looked at all of the standards, whether it was Nist CSF, which you overviewed earlier, or some of the other standards such as 853, NERC SIP. There are international standards, which is the first several lines there, called 62443 on safety controls for security systems. What we found is that the standards themselves, if you're relying only on standards, the standards are very influenced and have a bias towards prevention. That their focus is stopping the attack before it happens and assuming that will work. And the reality over the last 10 years of cybersecurity is that the adversaries are adaptive. They're humans. They learn. They change with the technology. So that there is an amount of agility that you need in your security standards around response and detection. But the facilities, because of their reliance and eye towards the standards, actually have put them in a lower defensive posture than they may realize, where they can have strong firewalls that they implement over time. Those firewall rules may change and atrophy and be less secure, and they don't have visibility into when that happens from a detective or response standpoint. So it puts them in a more precarious position than they realize.
Absolutely. It puts them in a situation where they've got documentation and visibility if they've gotten through the majority of the standards. And that's also a big problem, is the size of networks, given some of the large multinational companies that we have on the line. But with Nist, even with 53A, which is the big standard, and 800.171, which is the slimmed down version, you're just getting visibility. You're not getting to the place where you get risk and threat hunting and prioritization. I know that the CIS standard, which is the standard for security reasonableness in the state of California and other jurisdictions, is attempting to get at risk and really what are the controls that can prevent data security breaches in a prioritized manner. But in the security industry, I think we also need further reflection and self-examination of how do we help our clients measure risk? How do we help them prioritize?
Absolutely.
I know that you also wanted to talk about starting the technical conversation and what questions they want our audience to take back to their technologists and cyber teams.
Yeah, so this is a very nuanced discussion within organizations because you can very easily get one answer and accept that at face value. The reality is that you have to keep asking the same questions from a multitude of people to really start understanding where the middle ground is. I think it's really important to understand who the owner for your organization is on risk as it relates to OTICS, and if all stakeholders agree with who that owner is, to gain the buy-in on just measuring where you are and being able to truly influence the risk posture. Many of the firms we work with do not have a clear-cut owner of who manages the overall ICS risk grouping. Mm-hmm. Another aspect as well is, as I mentioned earlier, the name of the game is that we're defending against people who are intending to invade into these environments. So understanding these threats and the profiles attached to them, whether it is activity groups that have some foothold within your particular market, or have demonstrated some sort of capability across, say, a safety system that you may have deployed within your industrial environments, to ransomware attacks and understanding how ransomware attacks are evolving through extortion and denial of service ransomware. And there's a variety of new ransomware techniques that these groups are focused on. Understanding what that looks like and applying it to your OT environments to really figure out, oh, there's a weakness here that they could leverage to gain access, is certainly important, which is that impact on analysis. So certainly the name of the game is access into these environments. Once a foothold exists in the OT environment, that the range of motion that the adversary has is really large. So identifying where the critical components of that truly affect safety systems or a large scale impact to the overall operations, identifying those individual components and then instrumenting controls and visibility around those environments are super critical. And I would also add that the perimeter systems as well between these environments is also critical from a gaining access perspective.
That's so important. And as we're thinking through, as a lawyer, and also we've got a lot of risk managers and information security managers who are on the line, we want you to take what Ben is saying to heart. Make sure there's actually a roles and responsibility, or a ratio of who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for the components of the operational technology environment. And, we have listed the areas that our practice has seen that most often causes breach, which is access, vulnerability management, both patching and configuration management. Usually people do a good job of patching and sometimes might not have all the configs. Business continuity, disaster recovery, network security architecture and monitoring, device and node security architecture, which won't exactly fit in your traditional device in hardening guidelines that you have for your traditional architecture, change management, and incident response. And you might need your incident response plan tailored for your ICS and OT environments. So if you don't have a roles and responsibilities matrix or document, it's something that you want to make sure as a compliance manager, as a technology professional, that your organization has. We won't go through all these questions because we do want to end on time and be very cognizant of those who might have to roll into another call. But what Kim and I put together were a series of technical, operational, audit, and management questions you can ask to your operational environment technicians to just see what their answers are, see what they're thinking about these areas. So, this is your homework for those on the line. Ask your team if they know about the universe of their internet-enabled IC and OT infant architecture. That's your attack surface. As if it's internet-enabled and directly exposed, that's your attack surface. And just walk through these questions and see the answers that you get. I think most of our role as compliance professionals, as legal, as security, really is trying to indicate and look on someone's face and see, have you fully thought through this yet? Likewise, on that vein, we ask our clients, don't just accept what you are being told. We want to make sure that our clients ask for the artifacts of compliance that regulators typically ask for in order to demonstrate that your ICS and OT environment and the connected corporate pieces of your environment exhibit reasonable security under the law. What we have done is for each risk area, we have identified the artifacts that you should be asking for. And in terms of systems and business universe, that data map and inventory, security documentation, accountability, objective evidence, risk evidence, financial responsibility, management responsibility, and incident response. So, interview, accept and look for artifacts, and then make your decision. I can say on behalf of myself, Kim, and Ben today, we are delighted that everyone stayed in with us and listened to our presentation on critical infrastructure in the supply chain. And we don't have time for questions, but we do want to repeat the CLE code for those who need CLE on the line. This is the second code that you'll need to enter, which is A as in Apple, B as in Berry, 53146. That's A as in Apple, B as in Berry, 53146. All right.
All right, well, that concludes our program. Thanks so much to Amy and Ben. We really appreciate your time today. Thanks to the audience for joining us, and please stay tuned for our next panel presentation in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.